Morning, everybody.
What could this be? Ah, it's a Limehouse Blues.
Are we streaming? Morning, Chris. Okay, we are on. Morning, Martin. Couldn't tell if we were on or not there. Looks as though we are, though. Hey, Chris. Hey, Ava. Morning, Barbara. And Kathy and Kendra. Hey, Karen, Ellen, and Kathy. Hey, Lynn. Hey, Deanne, Kathleen, Maureen, and Marty, and Becky. Miles, where you go, buddy? Hey, Betsy, Bat, Laura, and Libby. Hey, Stephen. Nancy, Jeanette, and Susan. Hey, Louise. Say hi to Henri when Henri arrives. Ho, 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 Georgie. Hey, Jean. Hey, Susan. Look who's here. Look at all the people here, Miles. See, there's Tom and Laura and Jean. Mackenzie, Louise. Hey, Heidi. Lindsay Curry's here. Hey. Oh, shit. Oh, I just spilled really hot tea all over myself. Hold on, hold that thought, everybody. Miles, Miles, Miles. Luckily, there's a towel right here. Tea bag goes there. Oh, that was a grim way to start the day. Alright then. Guess I'm drinking water today. Morning, everybody. Hey, Patty, Susan, Kathy, Karen, Georgia. Oh, yeah, we're all fine. That was just now I got a big tea stain on my shorts. But hey, as Ted Lasso says, stains in your shorts are just a part of growing up. I should get more tea, but, you know, I can't have Miles go make it. It's alright. I should have tried to read the tea leaves while they were down there. Hey, Trisha. Hey, Lee. Hey, Heidi. Morning, Gina in hot Florida. It's actually nice in Chicago today. It's a little bit humid, but it's only in the 70s. It's really quite livable out there. Hey, Karen. Don't worry about the tea spill. That's my fault. Well, me and Miles. Miles, you want to come lick up little puddles of tea? You do have so much howling lately. Throat coat might do you good. Hey, Roy. Hey, Cindy. Yeah, you know what, guys? I'm going to go quick turn on the old hot water machine. The kettle, it's called. English major. All right. Good morning, everybody. Water heating up for a replacement cup of throat coat tea. To replace the one that is currently on my floor.
Give our faithful seat a slap and
Morning, Mom.
Hi-ho, Silver.
Miles, it's okay. It's okay. Come here, buddy. It's alright. See, it's okay. Whoa. Here we go. Say hi to all the nice people. Okay. That kind of freaked you out, huh? Morning, Robert on YouTube. Now, Heather the Bug seems to be okay. Share him in next week, we hope. No, a week from today, we hope to get a new kitten. Hey, Rob. Hey, Rodney. Hey, Bala. Hey, Karen and Roy and Jean. Hey, Call. Let's see if this is a tech support email. It is not. That's good. Mail's getting closed now. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Rob. Morning, Dina. Miles, the Boston Tea Party reenactor. Well, you're just a regular little David Kennison, aren't you, Miles? But for real. You see another Miles? You wanna come talk? Not really? I bet he's working. I can't do too much playing right now. Later on, we'll play.
Well, let's stop and have a little Father Hines melody of the Colorado sunset. Aye.
Well, good morning, everybody. Just joining me. It is a beautiful day in Chicago. If you were waiting to see what the weather's like before deciding on going on the Prairie Avenue tour today, it's just about perfect. Hey, Karen in New Mexico. Hey, Adam and Suzanne. Hey, Patty. Oh, Miles. Here we go. You want to say something? Okay, I'm gonna go get my new cup of tea made. I'm gonna have Miles, like, follow me out, though. Come here. Miles, come here. It's just gonna be quick, alright? You can chase this a little. Alright? There you go.
At crack of the dawn, every blade of grass where I roam, whisper as I pass every home. Hand in hand, we'll stand beneath the moon and bid the Colorado sunset good night.
Alright, well, I just about nearly spilled the new cup, too. Right as I get started. So, welcome along, everybody. Had to disappear to replace the cup of tea that I spilled all over my floor. Susan, the music is Earl Father Hines. Live at the Grand Terrace Ballroom. Morning, Grandma Bell. Now, luckily I had a towel on hand. There's some benefits to being such a slob that you leave towels hanging around all over the place. Hey, Roni, Kathleen, Monica, Susan, Lynn, Loretta. Hey, Kathy. Laura, yes, Grandma Bell turned 90 the other day. Morning, Aviva. Morning, Katie and Frosty. Give everybody a couple more minutes. Miles. Your daddy has to work right now. There we go. And Miles is very talkative. Miles really wants to play with the cat dancer right now. Morning, Kirk. Okay. Get yourself out. Exactly, he's like a 3-year-old when I'm on the phone. He would accept some treats, probably. What he really wants is to chase some stuff. We'll give Earl Father Hines another minute or two before we get started. Carol, I got about half of my steps in, but I know I'm doing a walking tour, so I can slack off a little in the morning. Hey, Julianne, we got a bunch of people here coming on the Prairie Avenue tour. Gonna be perfect weather for it. Hey, Karen. I know some people from last night's tour are gonna be there. Last night was my first attempt at a downtown gangster tour, except for one rehearsal a couple of years ago. But off to a good start. It jumps around a lot chronologically. That just kind of happens sometimes with walking tours. Dearlin, outside. I don't know where I'd put a treadmill exactly. In the winter, it might be tempting. All right, that's about the point of the Earl Father Hines old radio broadcast from the 30s that we switch over and go ahead and get started. All right, so welcome along, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining me. We're already having an exciting day. I already spilled 1 mug of throat coat tea all over the place, and Miles has been running all around behind me. So we're off to a really exciting morning. It's going to be a big day here at Mysterious Chicago. This afternoon is an in-person walking tour on Prairie Avenue. Tickets for that are at mysteriouschicago.com. But let's go ahead and get started here. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here for about 15 years now. Got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago the Book, H.H. Holmes' The True History of the White City Devil, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, and this is just a draft. I probably shouldn't show you guys this, but they did send me a preview of the Graceland Cemetery book that'll be out in April. Let's give you a very brief glimpse. Probably shouldn't have even done that. But that'll be out in April through University of Illinois Press. Last I heard, it was still coming out in April. You know how these things go. Well, anyway, one of my favorite things to do is look for relics of the old city cemetery that are kind of scattered around the city. We'll go into some of the old history about this in a second. Chicago was founded as a city in the 1830s. People had been living there off and on for a few decades before that. The cemeteries that we go to now, Graceland and Rose Hill, started having burials in the 1860s. Before that, you would see a lot more things like churchyards, things like private family burial grounds. But this is what churchyards looked like back in the 1800s for the most part. They were nasty, disgusting, marshy places that were designed without putting any thought into things like drainage. They tended to smell disgusting. It was generally believed that it was dangerous to be in them. People didn't attend graveside services because, for one thing, every time there was a shovel of anything, it would just, it would turn up something unpleasant. So this is just an example of what they would have looked like back in the day. Chicago decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to be progressive. We're going to put aside big patches of land way, way outside of the city where nobody's ever going to live and bury everybody there. And it won't be like these old ones where they've got the body stacked up 6 or 7 high and have to jump up and down to keep the higher ones below the surface at all. So here we have Chicago. I don't know how much room I gave myself on this map, But yeah, down here you can see where the Sears Tower is, the Willis Tower, Millennium Park, Buckingham Fountain. So if you look right above the river, just to the right of where it says Fulton River District, that was where one of our 1830 cemeteries was, right about where the Merchandise Mart is now. Wasn't really that far out of town even then. Just over to the right of that, up at about the top of this map, right on the lake where the Chicago Water Tower is now, that would have been about where the other cemetery was for a while. There was also a Southside Cemetery, which I'd have to veer down just a little bit here. It was about at 20th Street. 20th Street, we'll actually go within a few feet of it on the Prairie Avenue walking tour this afternoon. Very little data is out there about these 1830s cemeteries. Eventually what they decided was, okay, these ones are getting too crowded too, so in the 1840s, they put aside about 100 acres in what is now Lincoln Park. I didn't have enough of a map here, but you can see where it says Old Town and then it starts turning green. That's the beginning of Lincoln Park and where the Old City Cemetery was. Really, it would have extended a couple of blocks south down from that, into about Schiller Street. So, throughout the 1840s and 1850s, that was the main burial ground in the city of Chicago. But it was not very well planned either. It was said to be mostly just sand. It was a dismal, neglected place. Thomas Barber Bryan, who founded Graceland, said that it was repulsive. Every time that there was a big windstorm, the sand would be blown around, coffins would come right back up, and then they'd be rotting enough that you could see right into them. These were not pleasant places. So eventually, private cemeteries started being built. Thomas Bryan bought land for Graceland. Another land trust bought land from a developer to make Rose Hill Cemetery a little bit further north. So over the course of the 1860s and 1870s, a lot of the bodies were moved from the Old City Cemetery. So this is about where Lincoln Park is now. In the middle of it was a place called the Dead House. They decided our city is in greatly need of a proper place in which to store the dead bodies found in streets and byways of the city. Almost every week a corpse is found with no proper, decent, or safe place provided for its reception. So this is about the only image we have of what the Old City Cemetery in Lincoln Park looked like. It's probably not drawn by somebody who was actually there. This is from Harper's right after the Great Chicago Fire. During the Great Chicago Fire, that was about as far as the fire reached, so there ended up being a whole bunch of people just waiting around in the park and the cemetery overnight. There were a lot of accounts about things blowing up, of gravestones catching fire even though they were made out of stone, inscriptions being burned away. There's a whole thing, and the correspondent from the New York Tribune. This region over by the lake in the Great Lincoln Park seemed to offer safety, so a great rush was made to the park, and the refugees made themselves comfortable in the delusion of security. After ravaging to the limits of the city with the wind dead against it, the fire caught the dried grasses that ran along the fence, and in a moment covered the burning glory of the Catholic cemetery, which was just south of City Cemetery, and the grassy stretches of the great park. The marbles over the graves cracked and baked, and fell in glowing embers on the hot turf. Flames shot up from the resting places of the dead, and the living fugitives, screaming with horror, made for a moment the ghastliest spectacle that ever fell upon living eyes. The receiving vault, that's the dead house that they talked about building, essentially a morgue. It was just a little room that they built down at the south end of the park where bodies could be stored when it was too frozen over to shovel. That solidly built and shrouded in foliage fell under the terrific flame, and the dead burst from their coffins as the fire tore through the walls of the frightful charnel house. In the broad light of today, the place is the most ghastly I ever saw, not even Cold Harbor, where there was a great Civil War battle, exceeding it in its awful suggestiveness. Above the grave, charred stones stand grim sentinels of the dead, no more memorials of anything but disaster. Every inscription has disappeared, and even the dead are robbed by the flames. So this is part of why we have a difficult time locating all of the graves from here. A lot of them were badly damaged by fire. Many of the graves were not marked before. And all the time when I'm doing research, like last night I was putting together stuff about George Trussell, a gambler who was shot to death in Chicago in 1866. I couldn't find anything about where he was buried, but it was probably the city cemetery. And he probably wasn't marked, and he's probably still there. Same goes with everybody who was hanged in Chicago in the 1850s and 1860s. There's at least one mayor who was out there. Of course, if you want to know a whole lot more about the city cemetery itself, check out this website by Pamela Banos. It's called Hidden Truths, like hiddentruths.northwestern.edu. This was her doctoral thesis project. Pamela's great. I've bumped into her a few times, and she's got every bit of information that we have on the Old City Cemetery is right in there. But there are a few relics left around in Lincoln Park that are still there. For instance, down on the south end of the park, currently blocked off by some construction of new trails. But I hope that's gone pretty soon so I can start doing Grave Robbing 101 tours again. But right here is this thing that people walk by all the time and they think it is just a comfort station or a tool shed or something like that. Really, this is a tomb. This is the tomb of a guy by the name of Ira Couch. And some of his family members as well. Ira was a hotel owner. He ran the Tremont House. Abraham Lincoln spoke there. Senator Douglas died there. John Wilkes Booth stayed there. But this would have been built even before that. This Couch died in 1857. The mausoleum for him was built in 1858, so he probably would have been in something like a receiving vault before then. Died in Cuba, had to be transported up here. Now, today, there's a little bit of a mystery here. We don't know exactly who all is in this place. There's, as early as the early 20th century, they were already talking about it being a real mystery. In 1911, there was a rumor that went around that it was going to be opened up. Some locksmith had gotten like a prank order to come open the thing, but he couldn't do it. At the time, he said, I've been in the place before. There's nobody in there. They were all moved in 1880. But the actual documentary evidence does not support this. There's nothing in the Rose Hill records or the New Couch family plot saying that bodies were ever moved there from here. And even at the time, Couch's grandson said, no, I was there as well as a few other people as well. I have been through whatever I can to try to find out who might be in there, including things like Carolyn Couch's funeral expenses. She died quite a bit after her husband did. It's generally thought that Ira is there along with his parents, Ira and Mehitable McGee Couch, and a number of stillborn babies, and supposedly the friend of somebody who died, the child of a friend who died, and possibly a stranger who died in the hotel. But it's very well sealed. The door is really just, is really more of a slab. There's no hinges, there's no lock, there's no keyhole. It's really just a slab that's welded onto the walls. But I did notice a few years ago when I was out there with a ghost tour group that there's a crack under the door about the size of your pinky finger. So here's a bit of a clip from one of them.
I'm sorry I missed that joke.
I can't resist that one. All right, this place was built in 1858. It is the oldest structure still standing in the North Chicago fire zone. And it was built for a guy by the name of Ira Couch. He ran a hotel called the Tremont House right where Dearborn Lake is now. There's a parking garage on the spot where it used to be. There's actually a plaque out there on the parking garage that mentions that Abraham Lincoln used to stay in the Tremont House. It doesn't mention that John Wilkes Booth did too, but he did. But he apparently made quite a
I've already told you guys this stuff, so let me just zip through to where I demonstrate that it is in fact sealed.
This is just a slab with a strictly decorative handle on it. There's no hinges, no latching mechanism. Actually, you guys want a demonstration?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, camera's down for a second. You can get going, but just in case it is the day with these spikes. You can see.
The spikes make me nervous even now.
Yeah, believe me, this thing isn't going anywhere. It's actually welded shut to a couple of L brackets.
Alright, but the reason we know it's welded shut to a couple of L brackets is there is a crack under the door about the size of one's pinky finger. So using some really high-tech equipment called the Tomb Snooper 500, I was able, which is an iPhone taped to a wire hanger, I was able to get some pictures of what's behind some video of what's behind the door. Wrong video, this video. Alright, it was a rainy night. This is the ground in front of it. And the camera goes under the door. And here's the inside of the couch tomb. It's not the sturdiest tomb snooper ever built. But from that, you can see what's in there. So it turns out that what's behind the door is another door. There's a larger and somewhat more ornate door on the other side of this one. So that one doesn't have a crack under it, so building a bigger tomb snooper isn't going to help. But most likely, if there was ever anything in there, it's all probably rotted away to nothing by now. It's just most likely, unless Ira was buried in a Fisk metallic burial case, which is entirely possible. He was rich. They were the top of the line coffin, and they were all the rage of the year that he died. They were supposed to preserve your body forever. There's just a chance that behind that on a slab, Ira Couch is not only still present, but still recognizably Ira Couch. I wouldn't say it's a good chance. But maybe. But this wasn't the only mausoleum in the park initially. 30 or 40 years after everything else was moved in 1900, there were still little bits of what was the Peacock family, named for Elijah Peacock, who was the founder of the House of Peacock. Very highfalutin right there. But they are now buried down at Oakwood Cemetery. They were eventually moved, but for a long time they were using his old mausoleum in Lincoln Park as a tool shed. There was also a Hillside Vault that I believe some of the escaping animals busted into from the zoo one time. I gotta relearn my zoo tour pretty soon. And of course there is one burial that is still marked there, even though it's not really in the right place. It's a good day for people who spill tea, you know. But this is a memorial boulder that was put in place for a guy by the name of David Kennison. Love the look of this guy. Now, David Kennison died in the early 1850s. He had been telling everybody that he was 115 years old and the last survivor of the Boston Tea Party. He even had a vial of tea leaves that he gave to a guy in Chicago whose name just completely escaped me, but he's on the Prairie Avenue tour this afternoon, so I'm going to have to relearn that pretty quick. They're now in the possession of the Chicago Historical Society, but it's generally agreed by now that the guy was completely full of it. There's even a note in his military records saying, don't listen to a word this guy says. It notes that in 1818 he swore that he was 56 years old. Then suddenly in 1820 he was 79 years old. And in 1814, he had been 42. So over the course of between 1814 and 1820, he went from being 42 to 79, which really is a unique and impressive feat. He does seem to have been a War of 1812 veteran, so we give him credit for that, but he probably did not see any Revolutionary War service. If he was at the Boston Tea Party, at most he would have been riding on his daddy's shoulders. But I think people in 1850 Chicago had to kind of know that. But they liked having a Revolutionary War veteran around. And anyway, the guy was a really vocal abolitionist. He used to make great speeches about it. Having a Revolutionary War veteran on your side was just good business. Now, that's about as close as we get to a relic. This wasn't his original gravestone. It was originally unmarked. But after they started moving everybody from City Cemetery, there started being letters to the editor saying, don't you think that this is a shame that we've moved all of these bodies, but there's never been a marker for David Kennison? It makes us look unpatriotic. So they got a few people together who put their heads together and tried to remember exactly where he had been buried. This is where they had a service for him. Records indicate that he's buried a little further south, closer to the Couch tomb. But this is kind of the burial place of David Kennison observed, which is pretty close. But other little bits are rumored to be all over the place. For instance, there's this pond here at Graceland Cemetery that is sometimes said to be lined with gravestones from the old city cemetery. Now, it is my guess that it's probably not Old City Cemetery, but certainly we can see that some of the stones here are old gravestones. Now, this one is somebody born 1897, so it definitely would not have been the Old City Cemetery. But a lot of times, people replace gravestones. People build something more elaborate or more modern. And in the process, that leaves them with ones that they have to get rid of from the old ones. So this would have been probably busted down and used elsewhere. And there's actually quite a few places that they've done that around Graceland. It's always rumored that they're from the Old City Cemetery. It's probably not quite right. But we've got what's called the rubble wall over here on the northwest side of the cemetery. I mainly only go there when I'm covering Captain George Wellington Streeter, the last pirate king of Chicago. One of the last pirate kings of Chicago. The squatter who claimed rights to what is now the magnificent mile in Streeterville for years. But just over beyond him, on the rubble wall, I want to thank Lindsay Curry for helping me find this one. I think she's still out there. But if you look carefully, for one thing, some of these are clearly carved a little bit, but you can see just very faintly there it says, "Asleep in Jesus." And you see this quite a lot of places, like the rock wall where the Coyotes like to play over in the Bellevue section. You can see a lot of things that were originally coping that was removed from the cemetery around between the 1870s and 1930s. They had to do something with it, so they used it for rebuilding up these walls. But there's also a number of gravestones around both Graceland and Rose Hill Cemetery that are old enough, or at least have old enough dates on them that they at least may be relics from the old city cemetery. It's very difficult to know if they were new when they went here, or if they were actually moved from the old cemetery. But trying to find and identify these things is one of my favorite little scavenger hunts within cemetery tours. So I'm always finding more of them. Now, one of the older graves that is known to exist in Graceland is up here, the grave of a guy named John Kinsey. We don't actually have a drawing of what he looked like, but he was often said to resemble this one British politician. How the hell they knew that he resembled him is kind of beyond me. But he was one of our early settlers who died back in the 1820s, way before City Cemetery. But he would have been buried on an... According to some accounts at the time, he was buried in 4 different places. He was initially buried in a family plot. Then he was buried at one of the north side cemeteries, about where the water tower is now. Then he was moved to the old city cemetery where Lincoln Park is now, and now all the way up to Graceland. So this is final resting place number 4. Not just for him, but probably for some others. Here is the lot record. Now, the lot was purchased in 1865. You can see on the left there is the interment date. It was purchased upon a few months after the death of John H. Kinsey. Now, after that, they purchased it in, looks like in November of that year, after the Civil War had wrapped up and everything. They started moving people over. We can see that John Kinsey's date of death here is given as 1828. There was also John H. from 1862, Alexander Walcott, his son-in-law, who'd been dead since 1830, and a bunch of unnamed people who don't have dates or anything. They are likely stillborn babies who were buried in the old family plot, but it's difficult to know for sure. There's not a lot of record on who these other people would have been. For there not to be a record on somebody having stillborn children other than just what's in the burial record is not really uncommon in those days. So there are, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, a dozen people were moved here initially. Of those, only 4 have names. The other 8 could be even older than John Kinsey for all we know. But this is the entire plot. Most of those unmarked ones don't really have names. But John's was probably in a few different places. It was probably in the old city cemetery, and before that it was probably in one of the very few relics that would survive from the one by the water tower, and before that probably a family plot. Now, we don't have a lot of data about these people or who they are or what it was like to have them moved. About the best bit of information we've got on that, an actual eyewitness account. Let me pull it up in my book here. So this rusticated obelisk coming up over here is the family plot of a guy named Isaac Newton Arnold, who was one of the tight-knit group of abolitionist lawyers in Chicago. We'll probably take the route to go by this grave next weekend on the Graceland Cemetery Civil War walking tour. This was the guy who introduced the first bill that would have outlawed slavery outright. But he's buried up here in Graceland, and we actually have, in his case, a diary entry from April of 1873, in which he says, "Today attended the sad removal of the remains of some of my family who were interred in the city cemetery. Catherine Arnold died October 20th, 1839, aged 24, died at the Lake House in Chicago. Our son Edward Mason Arnold died March 1844 at my house, northeast corner of Ontario and Dearborn Streets. George Arnold, my son by my present wife, died 1845. Frances Isabella Arnold died 1846. Lizzie Mason Arnold died 1854. It was sad to disturb their repose, but they will sleep as placidly in Graceland. Alas, can they not whisper one word of the hereafter? Where are they? Do they know anything of us? Are they conscious that they are not forgotten? As one stands by the grave, how unavoidable the wish that we had done more to make them happy." These ones do not have individual markers here. Isaac's diary entry is about all that we really know of them. But it would have been an unpleasant task in any case. Thousands and thousands of people would have overseen the removal of remains from the old city cemetery up here to Graceland. But strangely, only Arnold is really known to have written it down. And we do have the records of them here. From 1873, just like he said. And then it was only very shortly thereafter, less than 2 weeks later, his son Arthur died in a boating accident and had to be buried here as well. Less than 2 weeks later. Let's hop over to Rose Hill Cemetery a bit. This is probably the most prominent one that we know for a fact was at the Old City Cemetery. And this is built by a guy named, commissioned by a guy named Horatio Odell Stone, who was a notable mortgage broker in Chicago. The H.O. Stone Mortgage Company was still advertising heavily in Chicago well into the 20th century. And they would depict H.O. as a guy in a coonskin cap who came riding into town, which is probably about what he was. But one day in the 1850s, he went back to his hometown and met Frances Pierce, who was 16 years old. He was about, I think, 41. She was 16. But he fell in love and married her. Which, in the 1850s, that kind of an age difference, the fact that she was 16 wouldn't have grossed people out nearly as much as it should have. They lived in a completely different time than we did. But she didn't live very long after she came back with him. She gave birth to a daughter, then died of tuberculosis. The baby died a few months later. Cause in that case is not really known. So to grieve, Horatio went over to Europe and commissioned this statue. And by some accounts, he had to commission it twice. There's one newspaper article that mentions that the first one that was built sank when the boat went down that it was traveling on. So there may be another version of this under the ocean someplace. But he had another one made. It was initially installed in the Old City Cemetery without the glass case over it. At some point it was moved here to Rose Hill. But for a while it was a little bit of a tourist attraction in Chicago. It was considered the finest example of statue that we had at the time. And Horatio, for his part, went back to his hometown in New York and married another 16-year-old who ended up living on Prairie Avenue. She outlived him considerably and was known as a very prim, proper, almost mean old lady. But she did have Oscar Wilde over to her house one time. Might have been really awkward. But also, right next to that are some older gravestones that are not that easy to read. It's often the case that you can't really get that the older ones have worn away too much to tell for sure. But these ones that are embedded in the ground like this usually were built to be upright. But at some point when they were moved especially, they just weren't really in good enough shape. So this is Dora, wife of H.O. Stone. And that would have been the wife that he had before Frances died 1843, early 50s it looks like. Then one of their daughters who had died in 1839. And Ebenezer, his father, who died in 1843. These were probably originally upright back at the Old City Cemetery, but sometimes when you move them, there's not enough left. You have to kind of break them to get them there. There's a few others over in the Levy Boone plot. These ones are really easy to miss, these really old ones. A lot of the oldest ones tend to be embedded in the ground like that. Up here we have got the plot of Levy Boone. Nice danceable grave. Mayor of Chicago, member of the Know Nothing Party. Known for being really anti-immigrant. He did argue for more hospital beds during the cholera wave of 1854. Though later it came out that he blamed cholera on immigrants. He blamed pretty much everything on immigrants. But just over behind him, there's another plot with some of the oldest gravestones in the city. They're from back in the 1840s. And again, it can be very difficult to read these older ones. These ones, that one you can pretty clearly make out died 1845. That one looks like 1830, so we're looking at probably an old family plot before one of the early cemeteries, unless that's born and there's another date down below there. Now that would be the death day, 1839. Okay, that would have been probably either where the water tower is or down on Prairie Avenue, about Prairie and 20th. Similarly, back over at Graceland. This one I found fairly late. Couldn't quite make out all of it. But over near the Curtis plot, there's a couple of them here. You can just faintly make out that it's the 1830s. So this also probably would have been one moved from the old cemetery that existed before the Old City Cemetery. Others are in such good shape that I kind of suspect they might have been rebuilt at a certain point. Like, this is George Collins at Rose Hill, died 1856, but the obelisk is just in such good shape that I strongly suspect that that one was probably rebuilt at a certain point. Might also be the case with the Elstons back at Graceland. Now, Daniel Elston was a Chicago merchant who had come over from England, had a brickyard and apple orchard about where Elston and Division is now, his namesake street. And among those are a couple of people who died, he himself died about 5 years before Graceland. So one of the kids nearby died even earlier than that. So I'm not really sure if these were what the plots looked like at Graceland originally. People tend to think that the body is inside of the stones and things like this. Really, it's known as a slab marker or a table-style grave or a box grave. Usually these are built over the grave. The body is actually buried several feet down there. And having it like this was just considered a good idea to stop grave robbers. It made it harder to dig up the grave. At least theoretically. They could just kind of do some slant drilling and get right in there. Another one that is in just too good a shape that I don't think they could have even restored it to look like this. But I haven't been able to find the records on it for sure. But this is William Bentley, a grandfather of Arthur Meeker Jr., who we'll be talking about today on the Prairie Avenue tour, who died in 1849. This is just in too good a shape to be an 1849 gravestone, but it is known that he died in the 1849 cholera epidemic. Now, before Graceland and Rose Hill were formed, we had 3 big cholera epidemics in Chicago. There was one in the 1830s where all the bodies were buried someplace around where Wabash Street is now. They're presumably all still there. But then there were 2 really big waves in 1849 and 1854. And one really common thread in gravestones that you find in Graceland or Rose Hill from the Old City Cemetery is they're from the cholera epidemics of 1849 and 1854. For instance, there's this great one for Jeanette Coe. To the left is her husband, Dr. M.D. Coe, so M.D. Coe, M.D., who is known to have been prescribing cannabis way before it was cool. But this is for Jeanette, who died in 1849. With the angel sculpture there, I wonder if this is by Edward Burkhart. Edward Burkhart had a stone carving shop and a monument shop right on the edge of the Old City Cemetery, and he was especially known for his angel carvings. He is also the guy who was hired to take a giant chunk of gypsum and carve it into a petrified giant that came to be known as the Cardiff Giant. He himself is at Rose Hill someplace, but I'm not sure where. But back at Rose Hill, there's another one. 1854, our other big cholera epidemic. And of course, one of my favorite stories to tell at Graceland is another cholera epidemic man, Jeremiah Price, under the tree here. Jeremiah Price was remembered as a man who, if he had any imagination at all, it did not extend beyond the alphabet. Now, one day in 1854, he came into a drugstore and said, "I need something. I have quite a diarrhea." And the drugstore clerk said, "Well, you know, Jerry, there's a lot of cholera going around right now, and that's the first sign. You should really get to a doctor." And Price said, No, I'll just have some peppermint lozenges." So it turns out you can't cure cholera with peppermint lozenges. The next day they found him dead with $20,000 in cash and securities strapped to his chest as though he were trying to take it with him. Now, he had not left a will. He had no family. He cared for nothing other than money. So it took decades to sort out his estate. But eventually, at some point along the line, a judge did grant leave to use some of the money to purchase a lot in a new cemetery and remove the monument established in the Old City Cemetery. So this is one where we have some documentary evidence that this was originally in the Old City Cemetery. And in his case, the lawyer in question here, his lawyer was right across from him. Happened to get footage in just one of the perfect days here for this one. LCP Freer, best known for his abolitionist work, was also Jeremiah Price's estate lawyer, digging through that for decades. For the auction of all of his personal effects, they had to have a barrel of lemonade to get anyone to come. And then Long John Wentworth reportedly poured some whiskey into the lemonade so that anybody would bid. But he died in the 1854 cholera epidemic, and just up away from him, just a little bit, is the law partner of LCP Freer, James H. Collins, who was known as a real firebrand abolitionist. He's the guy who famously said, if you see a police officer attempting to arrest a fugitive slave, they're not entitled to any protection of the law. You can attack them. Because all they're doing is kidnapping. But James H. Collins went out to Ottawa, Illinois to argue a case in 1854, the same cholera epidemic that killed Jeremiah Price, and argued the case in court vigorously, started to feel sick that night, and was dead of cholera by the next morning. But that was 1854, so this is one that would have been moved to the old cities from the old city cemetery. We don't have documentary evidence that they didn't just build a new one in the new cemetery, but usually that wouldn't have happened. Now, elsewhere in Graceland, there's one that's a little bit more mysterious. This is M.O. Walker, who is known as the Stagecoach King of the Northwest. Now, if you look around on here, it's got all the other family members in the plot, some of whom died way before the cemetery. It goes back to Livonia Walker, 1815, over on that side. On this side, you've got Lowell Walker, 1823, James O. Walker, 1829. This is not only decades before Graceland was formed, it's also several years before M.O. Walker even came to Chicago. So my first guess upon seeing this is there's no way that these people are actually buried here. They would have had to disinter them and move them to whole other cities, which would have been pretty unusual. But according to the lot record, they actually are there, or at least there's a space for them. Not too far away from him is a more nondescript one from 1857 for a guy named N.C. Caldwell. And the main reason I bring that one up at all is that M.O. Walker was at one point brought into court for something on the charge of perjury, but was not only acquitted, but the jury wrote him a card saying, just saying not guilty is not good enough. We need to actually apologize to you further for all of this stuff. Among those on the jury who signed it were N.C. Caldwell. Right over here. And right up here we get up to an older one for a guy named Justin Butterfield, a really interesting character in and of himself. Kind of remarkably, we even have a photograph of him. And in fact, he was the guy who owned this land before his death. So he's actually buried on his own property here, though it was purchased by Thomas Barber Bryan for the cemetery. But he was known as the most sarcastic and witty lawyer in Chicago. People were still remembering jokes that he made in the court, like one when he defended Joseph Smith, and I can't remember all the details of it, but the sun shined on somebody's head, and he said, "Lo, the truth shines upon him, and he knows it not." Probably had to be there. But at one point, somebody asked him, "So, you're known as a political guy. Do you oppose the Mexican-American War? A lot of people of your party oppose it." And he said, "Certainly not. I ruined my political chances by opposing the War of 1812. Since then, I have been greatly in favor of all forms of famine, suffering, and stupidity." But Butterfield died in the 1850s. And whether this is his original marker or not, or one of these older ones that are sitting around the perimeter of the cemetery, there's really just no way to know, around the perimeter of the family plot. There's another one here that gets a little bit stranger. This is E. Morrison and Orsimus Morrison, our first coroner. And in that family plot is a much older marker. The E. Morrison one looks way too new to have been an old city cemetery one. But there's this one that's not quite legible and has clearly been patched up a little bit for E. H. Morrison. And going over the card for that, it looks like the first people who were moved here in 1867, it was all little kids and one woman named Anna. But you get down further, there's an Ephraim Morrison, just down there by Balfema. It's a name you don't come across every day, who died in 1909. It looks like after Balfema's death, they moved several other people over, people like Ephraim, who had died in 1851. So really, by 1909, they wouldn't have been moving stuff from the old city cemetery anymore. So this one is a little bit more of a mystery. Where were these people before? I'd have to go through, get more access to the interment books, and then it might say and it might not. More likely they were at an old family plot, or they were possibly moved to from another cemetery, like initially moved to Rose Hill, then moved over to this one in 1909. A lot of things can happen. Got time for, I think, one more here. One more that I noticed lately. This is the Ogden family plot, originally for William Ogden, our first mayor, but then he moved away, so it's his brother Maudlin Ogden is buried there. But another one of the angel ones that might be a Burkhart gig. So this is for Henrietta Ogden, and died 1852. It was just kind of a fun scavenger hunt trying to find these things. One more for a guy named Fraser, and also Robert Ritchie. Crime, boy, I don't know. But A.F. Freer died, it looks like 1858 on there, so just shortly before Graceland started. And this has the upside-down torch motif that you see a lot on cemeteries. An upside-down torch is a symbol of eternal life. So really, if you turn a torch upside down, it's supposed to turn off, or to burn out. But in the imagery, it's always still burning. But one thing I could find about him was there was a big party for his retirement. At a testimonial in their regard, the employees of the firm of P.W. Gates & Co. intend to present A.D. Fraser, retiring partner, a splendid gold watch and chain. The presentation will take place at West Market Hall this evening at 7:30. Tickets can be obtained at the office of P.W. Gates & Co. Bet that was a real hot ticket all over the place back in 1856. So he would have had use of the gold watch and chain for just about 2 years before passing away. But alright, that takes me to about as much as I can tax my voice today with an upcoming walking tour today. This Sunday afternoon at 4:30, we're going to be doing Prairie Avenue, Scandals and Splendor. Prairie Avenue is the old millionaire district. A number of the old mansions still survive, but even in the places where the mansions aren't there anymore, the stories still are. We've got scandals, we've got no good kids, we've got some massive jerks. Lots and lots of fun on Prairie Avenue. Then next Saturday, I figured this was a good startup for it, we'll be doing Graceland at the Civil War. This is a new edition of the walking tour. We'll take a slightly different route than I normally do, and of course we'll include a lot of Graceland's greatest hits, but I'm going to focus a little bit more on Civil War stories throughout the cemetery. So that's all next week. Tickets are in person, are available at MysteriousChicago.com. Next virtual one will be Thursday night. That'll be the Graceland Architects Tour, and that's one that I just don't think I can do as well in person. There's a lot of multimedia involved in that one. I mean, it's one thing to say, here's an architect's grave. It's a lot better when I can use multimedia to show more examples of their work so that we all know what we're looking at. But that'll be next Thursday night. We've got in-person tours this afternoon, still tickets available, and on Saturday next week. Now, should you need a Mysterious Chicago t-shirt, sweatshirt, or hoodie like these fine Georgia voters, including Belle on the right, who turned 90 the other day, just go to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. We'll have the link to all of that, including the new design for Mystericon, October 1st through 3rd. Thrills, chills, dead guys, featuring myself and the effing Chicago crew. We'll be rolling out specific events and tours that'll be going on that weekend very soon. There's already tickets up available at MysteriousChicago.com for the boat ride, the 9:30 p.m. edition of the October 1st boat cruise. And with that, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I gotta get my voice back, but I'm gonna turn Earl Father Hines back on, and we will just hang out. So thanks for joining me, everybody. Here's Earl Father Hines. Fernando Jones, that's the name of the guy who got the tea leaves. Oh, that's cool, Adam. Bob Miles had a bit of a show over early on, then he decided to reenact the Boston Tea Party with me. He's been back and forth ever since then. Did a lot of playing before the tour. I'll find him in a minute. Somebody wore the con shirt to last night's tour, the gangster tour. Thanks, Ava. And hey, by doing it this way, I made my tea last the entire tour. That's kind of unusual. Dan S. was Earl Father Hines a priest? No, they just called him Father Hines. Oh, George, your house was on Prairie Avenue. And so were your no good kids. Thank you, Georgie. Eighth and 9th. I haven't listed the stuff for the 8th and 9th yet, but if that's a weekend, I probably will do. The in-person tours are usually Saturdays or occasionally Sundays. We're still just kind of, with the world situation, we're mostly taking things a week at a time right now. What happened to Lincoln Park bodies? Some of them were moved, many of them are thought to be still there. Though it's a very wet, marshy soil, so if one gets dug up now, you generally would have to be an archaeologist, even to know what you're looking at. Joanne, I did get your email. Sorry I haven't gotten to it yet. It was estimated that $20,000 was attached to the guy, some of it in promissory note form. But this is from reminiscences written down by people who were there a few decades later. They might be exaggerating a little bit by then. But it's interesting that the main thing people remembered about the guy was how boring he was. James, I got to do a Drake Hotel ghost hunt one time. I've never done a full tour of the place. But it's one that I could probably do a whole tour on. Stanley, it's in the realm of possibilities. Throw me an email, I'll try to get to it soon. It's been a really crazy week, so I'm a little behind on emails. I brilliantly gave myself 2 brand new tours and 2 that I've only done once this week. Gary, I'll have to check and see if I got that one. Molly, I did. Thank you. And don't worry, it's my fault. When I got towed last week. I mean, I definitely parked where I shouldn't have. Do I bring throat coat with me on walking tours? Not usually. It's very hard for me to do the tour and drink stuff at the same time. So my hands are kind of full. Thanks, Dana. But now I've got this awesome new Graceland flask to take on tours. Thanks, Linda. Maureen, my walking tours on average, I would say about 75 minutes. Some go a little bit less, some of them stretch up to about the 90-minute range. But I find that's about as long as most people can handle walking, especially in this kind of weather. Thanks, Kelly. Joanne, throat coat tea is a licorice and slippery elm tea that is made by the Traditional Medicinals Company. It's usually with the New Age and yoga teas. But it is delicious, and it does help my throat some. Oh yeah, one of those beer can hats. That looked real professional. I probably, in the old big straw hat that I used to wear on the boat tours, I probably could have hidden something like that. Tina, the Graceland book should be out in April. I haven't seen pre-order up stuff for it yet, but it should be coming pretty soon. It doesn't really taste like licorice, specifically. What is presently at the site of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre? A little empty field next to a parking lot by a senior living complex. Rodney, I actually feel fine. It's just allergies getting me today.
Now comes up number 8 on our program of dancing, a tune titled, melodically, A Little Kiss at Twilight.
Patty, the Graceland book has been done for a long time. It's just on publishing time, is what it is. It might have gotten slowed down some by the pandemic, but I think it's just publishing stuff. I haven't actually ordered the mysterious Chicago flask myself. Geez, how many flasks do I need? I had the one that was already in my bag when I bought the Graceland. I was like, wow, now I've got 2 flasks. I'm the biggest lush in the cemetery. Who isn't dead already? Oh, thanks, Doug. Pandemic tour. Well, the very first one, that virtual one that I did, was a health scares in history of Graceland. So it talked about pandemics and stuff. Not about the 1918 pandemic, all of the various cholera waves, scarlet fever, cholera infantum, all those Victorian causes of death that are all over cemeteries. Cherry blossom tea sounds good. James, that was health scares in history. It's one that I may be able to do as a walking tour. It would have to be a little bit different because the virtual route ended mid-cemetery. I've done that one a few times. Probably about time to do it again. I said that I'm afraid people are just tired of hearing about it by now. Nice, Gary. Am I working on any new books? Not at the moment, I'm not. I'm waiting for an opportunity to present itself. I've been so busy with tours, too. Kind of feeling like I want more tea now. Jeez. Besides this, the damp towel I'm full of tea that I'm standing in right now. And hopefully I'll get more podcasting going pretty soon. Octavio, yeah, we're working on the schedule. It seems like every time we try to do the schedule, you know, the Eventbrite won't load or something.
Here's rhythm and jive, Earl Father Hines and the St. Louis Blues.
Maureen, yeah, everything else that's coming up is on MysteriousChicago.com. Here, I'll put that up again. In person is Prairie Avenue this afternoon, followed by Graceland and the Civil War. Coming up next Saturday. Tickets for those are on MysteriousChicago.com. Next virtual one is Thursday night. That'll be Graceland Architects. But alright, ladies and gentlemen, I am getting awfully hungry right now, honestly. So I am gonna just go ahead and plug these upcoming ones one more time. I gotta save my voice a little bit for the 4:30 tour. I want to make sure I'm still in good shape for that one. So in any case, lots of cool stuff coming up here on Mysterious Chicago. Thanks a lot for joining me once again, everybody. I am Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. And I hope to see some of you this afternoon, more of you next Saturday, and tomorrow morning we'll be back for Mural Monday, once again, 10 o'clock here on Mysterious Chicago. So thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours saying stay safe, stay strong, stay healthy, stay well, stay vigilant. But of course, above all, stay spooky, ladies and gentlemen.